A day in the life of Jesus. That's what we'd like to talk about today. We had a parking lot service this morning just a few minutes ago. So if my voice doesn't hold out, forgive me. I did a good bit of hollering out there to try to get folks to hear me. Thought about Jesus preaching to 5,000 men, plus the women and children. Untelling how many were there that day, and all I had was a little parking lot full. But it was so good to be together again. To see some of those folks I hadn't seen in a few weeks. We maintained our social distancing and did it the way we're supposed to do it. But it wasn't like it could have been if we were all together in here, but it was so good. So good. Thank you, Lord. And now I stand looking at totally empty pews and a camera on the back wall. And I think it's hit me that I've missed the faces and the amens and the expressions and the smiles and those kind of things so much. I think I've almost quit being personal in my preaching, it seems like, just looking at that camera for the last few weeks. God's good. God's good. It's good to share these stories with you, just like you're here. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you tuning in. This day in the life of Jesus, what day you think I might be going to talk about? Well, it's a day that was recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. Surprisingly, you don't find that too often. You might think, well, he's going to go to the crucifixion. That was recorded in all 4, and you're right. Or he may go to the resurrection, that first day of the week when he was out of that tomb. That's in all 4, and you're right. Or you might be thinking he's going to go to Jesus' birth, but that wasn't in all 4. You see, Mark never mentioned it. And all John said about it was the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. Now Matthew and Luke took up that time. But they really didn't talk about perhaps the same day too often. Anyway, there's another day. A day in the life of Jesus that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. Why would I think this is significant? Why would the Holy Spirit think it's significant? Well, I don't know why the Holy Spirit thinks it is, but it seems significant to me. If we look at this, what's probably about a 24-hour span in the life of Jesus, and what all happened, and what he had to deal with, and what occurred around him, and what he accomplished in those 24 hours or so. There's a lot of encouragement in that to me. There's an example in that to me. You know, when Jesus was 12 years old, he looked at his mother and said, "Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business?" She was worried about him. She'd lost track of him. He was in the temple teaching the doctors and the lawyers and the scribes and the Pharisees and those know-it-alls that thought they knew it all. And he at 12 years old was about his Father's business, teaching his Father's business. He was very dedicated to his cause, I think every day, every moment of every day. You know, it says in Paul's writings, "To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is evil." Jesus knew to do good, and I think he did good every minute of every day. Now, I don't achieve that, and you don't either, I don't suppose. But we have an example of a day in the life of Jesus, where he was about his Father's business all day long. In Mark, Jesus begins to preach there, and the crowd is gathered, and there's an amazing passage right there to me. It was maybe about verse 35 in Mark 1. "And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed." A great while before day. He's already gone to a place all alone and prays. Simon and they that were with him followed him. And when they had found him, they said unto him, "All men seek for thee." You need to come back to town and preach some more. They're all looking for you. You've got a crowd, Jesus. You're getting to be famous around here. Jesus said unto them, Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, For therefore came I forth. He's so busy, he doesn't have time to go back where the crowd's already gathered. Now, most preachers, if they have a crowd gathered, it's hard to break them away from that. If they're the number one show in town, well, why go anywhere else? Jesus said he had many towns he needed to go to, and many places he needed to get to, and his ministry was going to be short, and he had to make the best of every day. He had taught in that place, and the crowds had gathered, but he needed to go to another place. In John chapter 4, it says, Jesus was wearied with his journey. It's midday, and he sits down upon a well, and he's a real man with real feelings, like being tired and like being weary, and like sometimes he sighed, like, you ever get that way? Well, Jesus was having one of those kind of days, if we could say it that way. He's weary with his journey. He sits down. The followers, his disciples, go to get something to eat. Maybe he needs something. So they go to find something to eat, and Jesus is sitting there. You might say, doing nothing? Well, not for long. He got weary, and he sat down, and they left, and then she showed up. You remember the woman at the well. And Jesus preaches to her, and then she goes back to get the whole crowd, and Jesus ends up preaching to the crowd, to all the town, to all Samaria. They come out to hear him. And in the meantime, it says, the apostles came back. And they've brought something to eat, and he said, I don't have time to eat, in so many words. He says to them, hey, my bread, my meat, is to do the will of him that sent me. That's what fills me up. Jesus said, man doesn't live by bread alone. He lives by every word that comes out of the mouth of the Father. Jesus said, my bread, what keeps me going, is God's word and preaching that word. And he goes on there and explains to them that he doesn't have time to eat. And they're quite amazed at that he wouldn't even have time to eat, as weary and as hungry as he had seemed to be just a little while ago. And he says at that point, well, let's read back here. My meat is to do the will of him that sent me, and to finish his work. Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look. The harvest is here. Today's the day. Now's the time. This city's come out. I don't have time to eat. I got to preach. I got to do my Father's business. I'm a busy man. I don't have time not to do good when there's good to do, even if it means don't eat. Even if it means get up off the well when you're tired. Jesus is our example. So, let's go to the day now that we have in mind that's recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. I got a message last night from a lady in Florida reminding me of something. I'd already thought about this earlier in the week. I sent out my little announcement of what I was going to try to preach on today, and she sent something about it bringing something to her memory. And it was probably 20 plus years ago that I had preached about this day in the life of Jesus at the church she's a part of in Florida. But what I began to think about after I got that message and the story I shared with her, I was down there for the weekend preaching a few services, and there was a break in the afternoon, and I felt like I needed to be by myself, and so I kind of slipped out and got in my car and headed off out in the middle of nowhere. And there was a little creek there, and I went across that creek on the bridge, and I pulled off on the side of the road. And I went down under that bridge that day so long ago, and I began to study about this day in the life of Jesus. It's one of those kind of study times that you don't have all the time, but it was one of those kind of times when it seemed like God was really with me. And so I preached this down there 20 plus years ago, and this woman messaged me and reminded me of that. So now I preach it again. It's been on my mind this week, this day in the life of Jesus. So here we go. All 4 Gospels. Let's start in Matthew chapter 14. I will try to give the chapter and verse so you might, if you want to study this further, be able to follow along. I'm going to be jumping back and forth a whole lot between Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, because all 4 of them record this day. And they don't record it exactly the same. They don't tell the same parts, but that's good. That's encouraging. That to me gives authenticity to the Scriptures. If Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had told exactly the same stories in exactly the same way, I'd figure they got their heads together on that, and there could be a possibility that this thing is not real, that these men got together and connived and said, we'll write the story, but we'll make sure we got our stories the same. It wasn't like that. You read Matthew, you read Mark, you read Luke, you read John, you get the same story, but you get the story from different men's points of view. You get the story as the Holy Spirit inspired different men to write different things about the story of Jesus. But this, for some reason, the Holy Spirit put all four men on this one day to write about it. So, in order to get the full view of the story, I realize we don't get the full view. Jesus said toward the end there, if everything had been written that he did, then the book world couldn't hold the books. But we're going to find that this day, for some reason, a lot of details, not the same details, but to get the fullness of the picture, we're going to jump back and forth and on in different places. And so it may get a little confusing. I hope not. But we want to try to get a picture of this day. Here we go. Matthew 14, chapter 14, verse 11. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel. That's the close of an account where John the Baptist was beheaded. Herod chopped his head off, or had his head chopped off, and given as a gift to his wife's daughter. A horrid time. That's what's just occurred. John's been preaching Jesus, and he gets his head chopped off for it. Next verse, Matthew 14:12. And his disciples took up the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus. Here's the beginning of the day as far as what we know about Jesus. John has been beheaded. They come with the news to Jesus. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. They come tell Jesus the story that John's had his head chopped off. How do you think Jesus took that story? Jesus is a real man, remember that. Jesus knows that John's in heaven. Yes, he does. But Jesus stood at the tomb of Lazarus and he wept. Jesus saw that widow woman carrying her son to the grave, and he had compassion and mercy on her and raised that child. Jesus went to Jairus' house and raised that 12-year-old girl. Jesus knew that death hurt. And with Jesus, death hurt. I believe that. This is John. Now, that's not saying that Jesus doesn't love some more than others, but John was a pretty different kind of guy. Of all the prophets, Jesus said he was the greatest. He's the prophet that 800 years before, Isaiah wrote about him and said that he was coming, the forerunner of Jesus, to prepare the way for Jesus. 400 years before, in the last writings of the Old Testament, Malachi talks about John coming. John had been talked about for a while. Jesus had known about John for a while. Jesus knows all his children, but John had a special place in this kingdom that was coming. And here John had preached his heart out, lived his life honoring Jesus, and in a sense it was Jesus' fault, if I could say it that way. I don't mean to be irreverent, but John's preaching Jesus, and because of that he gets his head chopped off. John's not the only person that ever got his head chopped off for preaching Jesus. But some way or another, you can read through the scriptures and you can find it seems like there's a special place for martyrs that are killed for the cause of Christ. Okay, John's been beheaded. John's the one that baptized Jesus. And he's gone, and Jesus wants to go to a place apart. Ever just wanted to be by yourself for a few minutes, for a little while? Kind of, I don't know why it does any good or what it does good, or sometimes you just need to be alone. Well, that seems to be the way that Matthew opens the story. Let's go to Mark's account. Mark 6 and 29. There'll be a little bit of repetition here. But I'm just trying to show you that we're all on the same page, that we're all on the same day. They're all talking about the same things, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark 6:29. His disciples heard of it, and they came and took up his corpse, same idea, and laid it in a tomb. The apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told him all things. And Jesus says, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. That seems to be the days of Jesus. They hadn't even had time to eat. There were so many there that Jesus was healing, and so many he was teaching, and so many he had compassion on. And he said, we just need to be alone. Come on. We go into a place by ourselves. And they departed unto a desert place by ship privately. Okay. They get in a boat, and they head across. Let's go to Luke. Again, just trying to get it all together here and be on the same place with all Gospels. Luke 9 and 10. And the apostles, when they were returned, told him all that they had done. They've returned. They come back with the news of John. And he took them and went aside privately unto a desert place. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus has gone with his handful of apostles, those that are closest to him, to be alone for a little while to a desert place privately. Let's bring John into the picture while we're here. John 6:1. John 6:1. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee. Here we go. Said he had gotten a ship. Well, this is where John's picking it up. John doesn't talk about John the Baptist being beheaded, but he talks about him going over the Sea of Galilee, and a great multitude followed him. We're picking up something else right here. Because they saw his miracles which he did on them and that were diseased. And Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Okay, we've got all four of them getting Jesus to the boat. John's got him across the boat and on a mountain. Let's go back and pick up a little bit yet in Mark chapter 6, verse 33. The people saw them departing. They see them get in the boat. And many knew him. Many knew all about what he did, his actions, his habits, where he went. They knew him and ran afoot thither out of all cities and outwent them and came together unto him. Now, the Sea of Galilee is not huge. I'm not exactly sure about the geography over there. I don't know how close he is to one end of it to the other end of it. But evidently, maybe the wind wasn't good for him to do fast sailing that day. I don't know. But anyway, it says they outwent him. It seems to me what's happened here, while he's going across, they go up and around, and they get there before he gets there. It says they outwent him. They beat him to get him there. And they outwent him and came together unto him. So here Jesus is wanting to get to a desert place apart by himself, be alone a little while, a little solitary time here. Remember, he went to a solitary place to pray. That's what he's wanting to do. He's needing to go to a solitary place and talk to the Father perhaps early in the day, and he's needing a little time alone. But he goes and has that in mind and starts across, but they outrun him, and he gets to the shore, and there he's coming up, and there's a mob, there's a crowd, there's the throng of people all standing there crying, begging, pleading, needing help. Could you heal me? Could you heal my daughter? Could you cast out this demon? Could you help this blind man? I can't hear. Could you give me ears to hear? And on the request go. And there they all stand. That's Mark's account. Continuing in Mark, the next verse 34, chapter 6. And Jesus, when he came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Matthew's account, 14:14. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion toward them and healed their sick. Mark speaks of his compassion because they were sheep without a shepherd. They had nobody to teach them. They didn't know what they needed to know. There was peace they could have if he told them the gospel of peace. There were teachings that they needed about grace and about salvation. I don't know what he taught them. I know what some of the things he taught them the next day, but we're not hardly there yet. But he taught them through that day, and besides that, it says he had compassion on them, and he healed all that were sick. So he's wanting to get to a place alone. He gets to the shore. There's a crowd. So much for being alone. He could have just said, I've had enough of you all for a little while. I got to have today for me. I need a little me time. That's not Jesus. It wasn't all about me. There's people need his teaching. There's people need his healing. And he has compassion on these sheep without a shepherd, and he'll be their shepherd. He'll lead them in paths of righteousness. He'll lead them by still waters. He'll heal their souls. He'll heal their diseases. What a Jesus this Savior is. So, back to John. We've already read this once. But John said they went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. So they come off the shore, it seems like. The crowd is with Jesus now. They're thronging him. He eases up the side of a mountain, and there he heals and teaches through the day. A busy day. The line is long. The needs are many. The Savior's good. His compassion fails not. He spends the day like a doctor on the job, or like a teacher in a classroom, or, oh, that's demeaning to him to even compare him to natural things, but that's sort of who he is today. He's got his job to do. He's got his jobs to do. He's wearing multiple hats. He's multitasking. He's helping those that need help. Whatever they need, he's there for them. So that's the way he spends his day. Not quietly talking to his Father. Not in a solitary place reminiscing. Not soothing his own wounds, but helping others. Now the day draws on. The day comes toward the end. This is the day, the night, the evening, the supper, where he'll feed the multitudes. Let's go to that one. Matthew 14:15. We're back to Matthew. And when it was evening, the evening's come, it's supper time. No mention of lunch. They didn't have lunch, I don't think, if we'll read on here. It was evening. His disciples came to him saying, "This is a desert place. There's not any restaurants. There's not any grocery stores. There's not any gardens to go pick from. There's not anything here. There's no food. We're in a desert place. We're in a desert place, and the time is now past. It's past time to eat. The time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go unto the villages and buy themselves victuals," that is, food. Send them away so they can get some food. You know what might be coming through on this too? These are his disciples that come to him and say this. You know what they may be thinking? Man, it's supper time. Are we going to ever eat? It doesn't say that, but what would you be thinking? It's time to eat. Why don't you send them away so they can go get something to eat? And come to think of it, I'm adding this part. Once they leave, maybe we can go find something too, huh? How about it? I'm just thinking like a man thinks, assuming that they think sort of like I think, that we all kind of think alike when it comes supper time. When you get hungry, you think about food. So their suggestion, send them away, that they may all go find something to eat. It's supper time. Jesus responded to their suggestions. The next verse, Matthew 14:16. But Jesus said unto them, "They need not depart. Give ye them to eat." Why are you going to send them away? There's no reason to do that. They don't need to do that. They need not depart. You just feed them. Whoa. What are you talking about, Lord? What do you mean? They've suggested send them somewhere where there's food. He said you don't need to send them anywhere. You just feed them right here. Now, that suggestion starts a conversation. Here's where I really like studying all four at once and trying to sequence a conversation. To me, this is just real neat the way this conversation seems to sequence to me. I may not have it in the right order. I admit that. I've enjoyed through the years trying to sequence the life of Jesus through all four Gospels. It's a difficult task. And there's different ways to look at different sequences and such as that. But for the moment, I'm talking about a conversation. I'm talking about them suggesting to Jesus, it's time to send them away. It's supper time. Send them where there's food. He says to them, there's no reason for them to depart. They need not depart. You just feed them. So, that was in Matthew. Let's go to Mark 6:37. Shall we go and buy 200 penny worth of bread and give them to eat? Somebody says that of the disciple group. They've suggested send them where there's food so they can go buy food. Jesus said you don't need to send them away. You just feed them. And then the question, we got to figure this out. We've got to understand what you're talking about. Do you want us to go? Shall we go and buy 200 penny worth of bread and give them to eat? Now, number one, I don't think they probably had 200 pennies, whatever that is. They seem to be broke pretty much all the time. Jesus ate of the substance that the women gave him. Jesus had to send Peter to go catch a fish to get a coin. It wasn't like they had a lot of money in their pockets, I don't believe. But anyway, that was the question. Do you want us to go and spend this many dollars, this many pennies, 200 penny worth of bread, and then come back and feed them? Is that what you're saying? John 6:5. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him. They're getting closer. He has said, they don't need to go. You feed them. The folks are hungry. The mob is hungry. When they hear that, I think they start easing in. So somebody, one of Jesus' disciples says, you mean for us to go buy them food? Is that what you're saying? Jesus lifted up his eyes and he sees all the crowd. He lifted up his eyes and saw a great multitude, John 6:5. He saw the great company come unto him. They're already surrounding him, but they seem like they're crowding in closer. If there's food, I want to get there. I want to be at the front of this line. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he said unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? Jesus said that unto him. This he did to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. They've said we need to send them away. He says, you just feed them. Somebody says, if we had 200 penny worth of bread, you mean for us to go and get that and buy that and bring it back? The crowd is coming in closer. Jesus says to Philip particularly now, he looks at Philip and he says, where do you want us to go and buy that these may eat? Whence shall we buy bread? Do you see any place we can go and buy bread? They're here now. We don't have time to get bread and get back. That's not what I'm talking about. It says Jesus knew what he would do, but Philip didn't know. He did this to prove Philip, to see how Philip would answer, to see what Philip's faith was like, to see if Philip really thought Jesus could do this. He did this to prove Philip, and then Philip answered, John 6:7, Philip answered him, 200 penny worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. Somebody has asked, do you want us to spend 200 penny worth and get bread? And then Philip says, that wouldn't buy enough for all these people. If we had the 200 penny worth, if we had a store right here, that wouldn't buy enough for all of them. Go to Mark 6:38. To me, this is the next line in the conversation. He saith unto them, how many loaves have ye? Go and see. How many loaves have ye? Go and see. Well, they're talking about going somewhere and buying bread. Jesus said, what do we have right here handy? How many loaves have you? Go and see. And when they knew, they say 5 and 2 fishes. 5 loaves and 2 fishes. One of the apostles, one of the gospels say little fishes, just so you don't think they've got 2 whales laying there or something. 5 loaves and 2 little fishes. Let's go to John 6:8. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him. Jesus has been talking to Philip. There's an unknown person talking. We're not sure who that is. Now Andrew chimes in. Jesus said, well, how much do you have? They said 5 loaves and 2 fishes. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, there's a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? Somebody says, well, here's 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and then here comes Simon, here comes Andrew, and he chimes in and says, yeah, it's this little boy's lunch. What's that? So many. That's not anything. That's not enough. That's not going to work. Jesus said, how much do you have? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Andrew chimes in and said, that's not enough. Do you see this conversation going where they're trying to figure out? Jesus knows what he's going to do. We've already read that. But they don't know it yet, I don't believe. And then somebody else in the crowd says, we have no more but 5 loaves and 2 fishes, except we should go and buy meat for all these people. And there it comes back around, full circle. What do you want us to do, go buy meat? No, I want you have what you need. There's no reason for them to depart. You feed them. It goes full circle. They're trying to figure it out, and finally it comes back again and says, we don't have but these 5 loaves and 2 fishes now, Master, unless we go and buy something. That seems to me to be the only plan. We just need to go and buy it if you want us to feed them. And I don't know how we can afford that. Jesus knows what he's going to do all the way along. And this conversation where they're trying to figure Jesus out. How many conversations do we have in our lives where we're trying to figure Jesus out? What are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? He knows what he's going to do every time. Anyway, he's put them through this, at least to prove Philip what he'd do, and I think he's kind of proved all of them that none of them have much confidence that they can do it. Just do it his way. What had he said? He said you need not send them anywhere, you just feed them. And then they're trying to figure out what he can mean by that and how in the world we can make this happen. How we can make this happen. You know, sometimes that's what men try to do. Abraham tried to make it happen. God had promised Isaac. He tried to make it happen his way. Sometimes our faith gets a little weak. Anyway, let's go to Mark now. Mark 6:39. Jesus kind of organizes the crowd. Remember, they're up on the side of this mountain. They've gone to the mountain, and the crowd's there. He commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass. By companies, groups. And they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by 50s, kind of in rows. Sitting in groups, a group here, and a group there, and then the groups are sitting in rows. What do you think that kind of pictures? To me, it pictures churches. Oh, you take 50 or 100 here, and you take 50 or 100 there. Is that the right number? I don't know. Jesus in another place said where 2 or 3 are gathered together. I'm not trying to give you the right number for a church, but that seems like a pretty good, right amount of crowd to me. You get a church too big, and how can it be really a church where everybody knows each other and cares for each other? You get a church too little, and maybe that's not just right either. We're praying for more at this church. But there's a just right somewhere. He said you got them sit down, 50s to 100s, something like that, and then set them in rows. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, he looked up to heaven, Mark 6:41. He looked up to heaven and blessed and brake the loaves. He thanks God for the food. Now, if that's all the food you had, you might not be too prone to thank God for that. God looks like you'd have sent enough. But Jesus thanks God for what's there, kind of like that handful of meal that never did run out. Kind of like that manna in the wilderness that was there every day for 40 years. Jesus said, this will be just right. This is enough. He thanked God for what God had sent that day, a sack lunch. Jesus thanked God for it. He brake the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them, and the 2 fishes divided he among them all, and they did all eat and were filled. Picture that scene. How did that really happen? What literally happened right there? I don't know for sure. I don't know if he broke it, and then when he handed it to them, they needed a trailer to haul it around. How much food would that have been? If there's 12 apostles, and there's maybe 20,000 here, we're going to read here in just a minute, 5,000 men besides the women and children. If there's that many, that's a lot of food for one man to be dispensing out. You know what I figure happened there? Here's the way I've got it figured. Jesus broke up those 5 loaves. Now that gives every man less than half a loaf. Less than half a loaf, 12 of them. And the fishes, they've got 1/6 of a little fish. 2 fishes, 12 men to pass it out. 1 fish was in 6 pieces, the other 6 pieces, fish in 6 pieces, and each man gets a little piece of a little fish to start off the journey with, passing it out. Excuse me. Little chunk of loaf of bread, a little chunk of a little fish, and they start up through there, and they give to this one, and they give to the next one, and they give to the next one. I think it's sort of like that barrel of meal. Their hand just never always had something in it. They're taking off up through there. They're passing out, and they're passing out, and they're passing out. And they did eat until they were filled. It wasn't that everybody got a crumb. There was a woman one time asked for a crumb off Jesus' table. This morning, a crumb. They got their bellies full. They hadn't eaten all day, and they eat till they're full. Excuse me. And they did all eat and were filled. Matthew 14:21. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. There's your number. Matthew's the one that gives us the number. Besides the women and children, it says 5,000 men. If you assume that most of the men had a wife, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, that's an assumption. If they all did, that's 10,000, just to keep math simple. If each husband and wife had 2 children, it says besides the women and children, there were women and there were children there. So we've got 5,000 men, 5,000 wives, 2 kids in each family. That's 20,000 right there. I don't know if that's right or wrong. It doesn't matter. The Bible says 5,000 men plus the women and children. That's a crowd. That's a crowd. John 6:12. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. 2 little fish and 5 loaves is all they started with, and they've got leftovers. Leftovers to gather up, that nothing be lost. They couldn't eat all that they were served that day. They couldn't empty the bowls. The baskets still had food in them. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. After everybody's eaten and are filled, there's 5 basketfuls of loaves left. 12 basketfuls of loaves left. 12 disciples, 12 apostles, 12 baskets left. I like that. Sometimes a preacher can feast on his own preaching. That's not bragging. That's just the Lord blessing the one that dispenses it to get a little of the spiritual food too. God's so good. God's so good. Now, I do better when I'm listening to somebody else's preaching, don't get me wrong. But right now I'm listening to mine and I'm thinking about Jesus, and that's not so bad. Sometimes all right to eat a little cooking that you've kind of helped prepare a little bit and passed out, but it was the Lord that gave the food. It's the Lord that supplies the needs. He just sometimes let us hand it out a little bit. But then there's something left that we might enjoy it a little bit too. God's so good to his sheep and to his preachers and to all of his children. Well, we read on in John 6:14. Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into the mountain himself alone. Whoa, they're going to make him a king. He is the king, but he's not the king the way they're talking about being a king. His kingdom's here, and he's the king of his spiritual kingdom. But they're going to make him a natural king here. I want you just to remember that by the end of this sermon. I want you to remember how high Jesus was in their view of him at this point. He's fed them. The food was great. They needed the food, and they've been fed, and they're going to make him a king. Anybody that can provide needs like this, he needs to be the king. We're going to put him in charge. So John throws that in. He's the only one that talks about that. Back to Mark 6:45. We've got Jesus departing in John right there. Let's see in other places. Mark 6:45. Straightway, that means immediately, at this point in the day, they've been fed, the baskets have been gathered in, the 12 baskets. They've decided to make him a king, and he is in the process of departing alone. But before he leaves, Mark says something. Straightway he constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida, while he sent away the people. And when he had sent them away, he departed into a mountain to pray. And when the night was come, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. Okay, probably 12 hours or so later, they'd come with the news early in the day. John's dead. He had wanted to be alone. Not today. He's too busy with his Father's business. He was weary with his journey, but it wasn't time to be weary. It was time to be up and going. Finally, everybody's fed. The scraps have been gathered up. The people have been healed. He's spent the day teaching. He puts his disciples in a boat and has them to the other side, said, I'll see you later. You all go ahead. And he's finally up in the mountain apart in a solitary place praying. We have no record he ever went to sleep. He's praying. He's praying. He's talking to his Father. He needs to touch base with God. He needs a little heaven time right here. This world, it's mighty hard. It's been a tough day. It's been a long day. It's been an emotionally draining day. John the Baptist is dead. He preached me. He lived me. And for doing that, they've killed him. He needed some heaven time, some comfort time. He needed to talk to the Father of all comfort, who comforts us in our needs. So he spends time in prayer to God, having sent his apostles across, having sent his followers away. He's finally alone there. He alone on the land, Mark 6:47. Let's go back to John 6:18. And the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. Mark 6:48. And he saw them toiling in rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. Matthew 14:24. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves. All three, John, Matthew, Mark, talk of the storm that's brewed. He sent them across. He constrained them to go, it says in Matthew. And he knew the storm was coming, and now they're caught in the storm. Does he care? Carest thou not that we perish? That's what they had said to him in another storm earlier. No, they wouldn't perish. He's got his alone time. He's finally by himself with his Father, but his followers need him. The apostles are in fear. The waves are pounding. The sea is churning. The boat is rocking to and fro. They're perhaps at their wits' end, and he knows that. He sees them from land and knows their case. From afar away, Jesus sees you and knows your case. So what does he do? Let's go to Matthew. Let's stay with Matthew on this one. I like Matthew's account. It's more detailed. Matthew 14:28. Peter answered him and said, Lord, no, Matthew 14:26. I've gone down too far. Jump up 2 verses. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, Mark 6:48 had told us it's the 4th watch of the night. The 4th watch of the night, that's, let's see, first watch is 6 to 9. Second watch is 9 to 12. Third watch is 12 to 3. Fourth watch of the night, it's after 3 o'clock in the morning. Jesus has been praying. Long day before, he's been praying through the night. He sees they're in trouble, and the 4th watch of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, he goes toward them, walking upon the sea, and they see him walking, and they're troubled, saying, it is a spirit. I think that means it's a ghost. Who's not afraid of a ghost? Everybody's afraid of ghosts, I reckon. I am. Oh, I used to live in a house that I thought was a haunted house almost. There were strange things happened. One time I even think I saw him, but that's a different story. You don't like to see a ghost, especially on a stormy night. Here they are. They look out and see him walking. Well, what can walk but a ghost on the water? They think it's a spirit. They see him walking. They think it's a spirit. They cried out for fear. Grown men crying out, screaming in horror, in fear. They're scared to death. But straightway, immediately, Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. It's me. They recognize his voice. Well, how's he doing that? That's a good question. But he tells them, don't be afraid. I'm not sure how not afraid they are yet, but there's one that speaks up. Peter answered, said unto him, Lord, if it be thou, like I don't know for sure, but if it's really you, bid me come unto thee on the water. Let me walk on the water. There's a man with a ton of faith right there. Now, sometimes Peter's faith was weak, and sometimes Peter's faith was strong. This time, Peter was the one with strong faith. It's you, Lord. You know what I figure Peter's seeing is Jesus out there stable, solid as a rock. They're in the midst of the sea, but there's a rock there. You know, if you can get a hold of a rock, that's something to hold to. If everything else is rocking and there's a Jesus standing there steady, that's time to come to Jesus. He said, if that's really you, you tell me to come to you. You tell me to get out of this boat and come where you are. And he said, come. The word of Jesus, come. Another place Jesus said, ye that are weary and heavy laden, come unto me, and I'll give you rest. Come. Jesus says, come. When Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now, it's baffling enough to think that Jesus in the flesh was walking on water. But here's Peter walking on water. I know of 2 men in history that walked on water, Jesus and Peter. That's an elite group. Now, Peter didn't walk long. We're going to read on. I know that. But Peter had enough faith to get out of the boat and take a step or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever he took. He's going to Jesus. Jesus said, come, and here he comes. He's walking on the water. It's quite baffling. It's wonderfully amazing. Peter's walking on the water. And when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. Be not afraid, Jesus said. Peter's not afraid. He's courageous. He's brave. He's faithful. He's daring. He's coming to Jesus. And then he looks at the wind. He looks away. Oh, that's not good. That's not good. As long as you're looking at Jesus, you can mount up on wings as eagles. You can run and not be weary. You can walk and not faint. You can walk on waves above the trouble somewhere. The waves are still there, but Peter's above the waves. He's on steady ground heading toward Jesus in a higher plane somewhere, mounted up on wings as eagles. There he goes. And then he looked back. Oh, don't look back. Don't look down. Don't look at the wind. Don't look at the storm. He saw the wind boisterous and he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. He's not talking about wanting to be saved to heaven. He's not wanting to go to heaven right there. He wants to stay here. Lord, save me. Immediately. How many immediatelys have we had here? Jesus immediately said, don't be afraid. Jesus immediately comes to him. Jesus immediately reaches out his hand, stretched forth his hand and caught him. Caught him. He's sinking pretty fast, seems to me, like he caught him. And said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? He had had great faith 3 seconds before. Now, before he has time to plunge beneath those waves, catches him and said, "What happened to your faith? Now you got little faith again." Fleeting moments we have great faith perhaps, but most of the time we dwell among the little faithers. That's me. Lord, I believe, but help thou mine unbelief. Make my faith stronger. But when I pray that prayer, make my faith stronger, you know what makes faith stronger? Storms and fires and trials and troubles, tribulations, heartaches, times you have to turn to Jesus, times that Jesus does grab you and save you. Then next time your faith will be a little stronger, and the next time a little stronger. And by the time we live long enough, maybe our faith gets a little bit bigger, but still not very big. Oh, Lord, haste the day when we can see you with our eyes, and our weak faith doesn't limit us anymore. But we thank you for the faith you've given us. It's a gift of God that helps us see an end to the troubles and light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, thou of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. When they were come into the ship, Peter and Jesus, now back in the ship, it said the wind ceased. Mark says it like this, Mark 6:51. And he went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered. Beyond measure they're amazed. You know, you can measure with a ruler, with a yardstick. Beyond what you could measure, they're amazed. There's no measuring to it. There's no way to describe it. It goes off the scale. It's bigger than what you can imagine. They're amazed. I bet they are. A calm. One time, other storm that Jesus was in, he said, "Peace, be still," and said there was a great calm. A great calm. They're amazed at the calm. They were afraid of the storm, and now they're wondering at the calm. They were amazed beyond measure that the wind had ceased. Suddenly, total quietness. John 6:21. Then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. They immediately received him into the ship. I bet they did. Come on in here, we need you. Sometimes you immediately receive Jesus into the troubled life, into the troubled ship. In the midst of the storm, they receive him into that ship. Glad he's there. The wind ceased, and it says, and immediately, here we go immediately again, immediately the ship was at the land where it went. There's a great calm, and all of a sudden, just they're over where we're going. They're at the shore. They've arrived. That's what they've been yearning for in the midst of the storm. Give us some dry land. There's the dry land, and there's Jesus, the rock of your salvation. Matthew 14:33. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, they that were in the ship, they're off the ship now. You see, jumping back and forth between they got in the boat, and the wind ceased, and they're immediately at the land, and going through all of them, you can see what happens here. You can see the sequence. And when they were out of the ship, they worshipped him, saying, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. You know what will overcome the world? Your faith. 1 John 5. What overcomes the world? Even our faith. Whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Son of God, his faith will overcome the world. They worship Jesus here as the Son of God. They know who they're dealing with here. They know who's dealing with them, the Son of God. He's calmed the storm. He's calmed their fears. They worship him. He's the Son of God. So they're across the sea. Sometime around the fourth watch of the night, Jesus walks to them. This probably didn't take too long. He calms the storm. The boat's immediately on the other side. And there they are. The 12 and Jesus. Okay. That's kind of the end of the day, but it's really not probably the end of the 24 hours. We're going to count this day pretty close to maybe 24 hours. You might say, well, now the sun comes up and it's another day. Well, actually, in the Jewish day of figuring days, their day started at 6 o'clock in the evening. So I don't know how we're going to measure days, but we're going to talk about probably about 24 hours. I don't know what time of the day the last day started. I don't know what time he got the news, but they'd had time to get John buried and get to where he was, and they come with the news. So we're going to figure that was sometime in the morning that they arrived that first day, when he wanted to be by himself, you remember. And they got in the ship, but they outwent him, and he gets there, and he has to heal, and he has to teach, and all the things he does, because he's not just because he has to, he wants to. He does it because he has compassion on them. He feeds the multitude. He sends the crowd away. He sends the apostles. He walks on the water. Now he's on the other side. It's a little before daylight, and day breaks. Day breaks. But it's not been hardly 24 hours yet. Let's go to John. The day following, this is daylight the next day, when the people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat there, save except that one whereinto his disciples were entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away alone. 25th verse, when they had found him, they go to the other side, then they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? How'd you get here? We saw you boys there leaving the boat. We know they left in the boat. We saw you go up in the mountain. I don't know what you did up there. He went up there to pray. I'm adding some things here, but I'm just trying to read their minds, what they were thinking. They get up the next morning. Where's Jesus? You know what they're ready for? They need some breakfast. I believe it. I believe it. I think John chapter 6 tells us that in so many words. They've awakened. They've slept all night there out in the open. There's still nothing to eat. They're in a desert place. But I know the man that he's going to make king. He'll get us some breakfast, I'll bet you. But they start looking for him, and he's not there. And so they go back on the other side. You know, it said they knew where he went and how he spent his days. So maybe he's got over. I don't know how he could have got over there, but we saw his boys going over there. Let's go see what they know. I kind of picture all this. I'm adding a lot right there. But they get to the other side, and there he is. There's Jesus. But there hadn't been a boat for him to ride in. What in the world happened here? How'd you get here? Oh, if they'd only known. We don't have any record of what Jesus told them right there. He could have just said, well, I walked. That's what he did. He walked until he got to the boat, and then he rode the rest of the way. I walked about halfway, and then I rode in the boat the rest of the way on calm seas. They said, how'd you get here? That's their first question. Verse 26. Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat of the loaves and were filled. Did I misjudge the multitudes there? What does Jesus say? He knows their minds. He knows their hearts. He knows why they came. He knows why they're looking for him. You're not seeking me because you saw my miracles and understand I'm the Son of God and that you should be bowing in spiritual worship to me. You're seeking me for breakfast. You're wanting some more natural food. You think I could be the king that would just feed you and you wouldn't ever have to work again. You like that kind of system where the king just feeds you? Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. Well, he says to them, that's what you're looking for. I know what you're looking for. You're not looking for me. I know who you're looking for. You're looking for me, but not for the right reasons. You're looking for me so I can give you natural blessings. Sometimes we can fall into that category, friends, that all we're looking for is the natural blessings, that we just want to live by bread alone, by the things this world can give us, by getting a step ahead down here. Jesus says there's more to it than that. And that's what he begins to teach them this day. They've come to him. He says to them, all you're wanting is more natural food. Verse 33, John 6 and 33. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven. He said, I'm the bread that you really need, that'll fill you in a way you don't understand, that'll fill your empty souls, that'll help you in your vexed spirits, not your bellies, but your hearts. I'm food for that. I'm the bread of God, which is come down from heaven. Jesus said unto them, I'm the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger. He that believeth on me shall never thirst. And I said unto you that you have seen me and believe not. You're not understanding the spiritual impact and fullness of this thing. You're not understanding who I am. You're not thinking from an eternal perspective. You're not thinking from a spiritual view. All you're thinking about is what you can see with your eyes. Think deeper. Think stronger thoughts. Think about what will really strengthen you and fill you and help you. I have meat to give which is not of this world. And then Jesus began to teach them about who would come. He looks at them and said, you don't believe me. You're not coming to me for the right reasons. Jesus had told a group earlier, no man can come to me. He tells them right here, he told a group earlier, you will not come to me that you might have life. He looks at these and he says, here's who will come. All that my Father giveth me, they'll come, and I'll lose none of them. I'll not cast them out. I've come to do my Father's will. This is the Father's will which has sent me. Verse 39, this is the Father's will which has sent me, that of all which he hath given me, I'll lose nothing, but raise it up again the last day. He says, here's how you come. John 6 and 44, no man can come except the Father draw him, and I'll raise him up the last day. Jesus said, you've come to me naturally. I understand that. You came over here to this side looking for food. I understand that. But you're not coming to me spiritually. I know that part too. And then he says, no man can come unless God draws him. Now, those are hard sayings. They're going to tell him that before it's over. Those are still hard sayings today. You preach this kind of stuff and people don't like it. That it's all of the Lord, this coming part. Coming to Jesus is all of the Father. It's not of us, it's of God. You will not come, no man can come. God is the one that has to do it all. Spiritually speaking, God does it all. His salvation is of the Lord. Your coming to God spiritually is God coming to you first. They don't like what they're hearing. Men still don't like that. The sermon goes on. For the sake of time, let's drop to 6 and 65. John 6 and 65, Jesus repeats again. They've come to him naturally, but he said, you haven't come to me. They've come, but they haven't come. How's that? They came naturally. Jesus said, you haven't come spiritually. Your heart's not in this. It's your bellies you're listening to. No man can come to me except it were given unto him of my Father. 65 verse 66. From that time many of his disciples went away and walked no more with him. These are hard sayings. Hard sayings about a sovereign God who gets all the glory for salvation. The spiritual coming's all of God. No man can come except it's given to him of the Father. And they walked away. They walked away. The best preacher that's ever preached, and they walked away. They turn and leave him. They'll no more be his disciples, his followers. They're through with him. They turn and walk away. You talk about a good preacher that lost his crowd because he preached the truth. Next verse, then said Jesus unto the 12, will ye also go away? Are you going to leave too? Oh, listen to Simon Peter. He answered, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. We believe and are sure that thou art that Christ, the Son of the living God. We believe you're the Son of God. You have the words of eternal life. Where else could we go? When you understand the truth of God's salvation, the certainty of it, where else can you go? When you've seen Jesus as your Savior, where else can you go? The truth will make you free. Peter said, there's nowhere we can turn but you. No, we're with you. I'm still with you. The multitudes, the thousands have gone. There's 12 still standing there. You know what Jesus said? He said, have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil. So really just 11 standing with him. After feeding the multitudes, walking on the water, compassion with healing and teaching. This may be, I'm going to guess, sometime a little after breakfast time. They came to Jesus about breakfast time wanting something else to eat. It took him long enough to preach this one sermon that they've all turned and gone away. If you're not going to feed us, we're leaving. We don't need you anyway. Only the 11 faithful remain with him. And the very next verse, after these things, the Jews sought to kill him. From desiring to make him king yesterday evening to the Jews seeking to kill him by probably mid-morning. From mid-morning to mid-morning, about 24 hours, Jesus got the bad news of John the Baptist's death, desired to be alone, had compassion and teaching and healing on sheep without shepherd, fed the multitudes, sent them away, spent the good part of the night in prayer to God, walked on water, calmed the storm, got to the other side. Here come the multitudes. He preaches a sermon, and they all walk away. A day in the life of Jesus. When they all walk away, you might say that wasn't a very good day. Oh, it's just another day for Jesus. He's doing the Father's will, and he gets rejected by most, but he keeps on doing the Father's will. He's our example. What a day. What a day that Jesus spent that day. May we be diligent in our days to serve our God, to use our time wisely, to redeem the time, the Scriptures say, to do good with the time we have. God bless you.